Thank you for tuning in once again to his Vine and Fig Tree podcast. My name is Kurt Olson. I'm your host. I'm coming to you on the afternoon of January 15th, 2025. And we are rushing headlong toward the inauguration of Donald Trump to his non consecutive term next Monday. No hints yet at what that inaugural address will look like, at least that I've seen and heard. But we are into confirmation hearing mode. Um, Going to point out some things that have come from those hearings, and also going to make just some observations as well um, about not just those hearings, but really more government generally, and where things have descended. Um, because that's going to get into something that I have to say at the end about the California wildfires. Um, Starting off with Mark Wayne Mullen. I don't think the average American would know who Mark Wayne Mullen is. Mark Wayne Mullen is a U.S. Senator from Oklahoma. And on Tuesday, the 14th, Pete Hegseth, the nominee for Secretary of Defense, um, had confirmation hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee. And what typically happens in these hearings is you have the the chairman or chairwoman, if it happens to be a female, of the committee, then the minority member. They typically whoever's testifying speak first, and you will have, depending on seniority on the committee, people Republican, Democrat, going down the list. So Mark Wayne Mullen emerges. He is again a senator from Oklahoma. The other senator from Oklahoma is Jim Lankford, and Mark Wayne Mullen proceeds to rake Democrats over the coals for their hypocrisy. Now, this gets to some of the things that have been said in past weeks as we have been moving headlong toward confirmation hearings for Pete Hegseth. There was talk about his past abusing alcohol, um, past situations with females. Some would say cheating on wife. Some would say some have even accused him of um, sexual misconduct. He denies those things, but that did not stop that conversation from happening in the Armed Services Committee. So, Mark Wayne Mullen um, emerges. He's given the mic, and he proceeds to just scold Democrats on these two fronts. He goes, "How many senators?" And when he said this, he was really directing some comments toward one of the senators from Virginia, Tim Kaine. How many U.S. senators have voted on the floor drunk? And he proceeded to say, and this is what was so fascinating about what he was saying here. He proceeded to say, and don't say you haven't seen it, because I know you have. And that gets to a very different kind of conversation. I'll get to that in a second. And then he proceeds to say, how many of you have gone after and called for the resignation of members of the Senate who have divorced their spouses for infidelity? I mean, he just goes after his colleagues, and frankly, it would be both sides of the aisle, frankly, even though he was targeting his comments at Democrats. And Mark Wayne Mullen, I'm going to put the segment of his remarks that run about 7.5 minutes. The part that has the meat here that I'm talking about probably is in the first 2 to 4 minutes of that segment. I'm gonna link that in the podcast because people should see it. And my understanding is in the Armed Services Committee room, Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room, there was a collective from the audience, like, what is he doing? Where is he going with this? And so, um, Mark Wayne Mullen makes a name for himself. Someone again who you would not be able to pick out if someone put a few hundred names in a list, and you were to identify the U.S. senators in that list. I'm willing to bet Mark Wayne Mullen would not be one of the names most Americans would pick. But that happened yesterday. Okay. Um, and today there are 6 cabinet members or expected members of the Trump cabinet that are having hearings. I have seen clips of 2, and this is where things stand. One is Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. Another one is Pam Bondi, Attorney General. Um, the segment I saw from Marco Rubio was him just, and this is what I like about There's a lot of things I like about Marco Rubio. I mean, you're never going to agree 100% with everyone, but one of the things I like about Marco Rubio is there has got to be a sense of fear and trembling right now in Central America. Marco Rubio is I believe I'm right on this, a Cuban American. And I don't like the whole hyphenated American thing, but he's got family that came from Cuba or somewhere in Latin America, and some of the governments in Central America and the Southern Hemisphere that line up a little closer to, let's say, China and Russia than the United States are going to get the full wrath of Marco Rubio. Um, and he didn't pull any punches in his remarks. Um, he took direct aim at China, and something that is long overdue, something that has been needed for a long time from someone in the United States government. It will be more interesting the substance that comes from that, the kinds of conversations that happen. Marco Rubio has been someone who's been very concerned about religious persecution, something that's near and dear to my heart in terms of that being a concern of mine. And it's just going to be interesting how a Marco Rubio Secretary of State leadership takes flight. But he made no qualms about what he said in that the things that Americans hold near and dear, are far too often made in China, coming from China, whether it's medicine, whether it's healthcare equipment, you name it. And he's like, we can't continue on this course and expect us to have an America that we hold near and dear. And then the short piece that I saw on Pam Bondi. For those who don't know Pam Bondi, Pam Bondi is was the Attorney General in the state of Florida. The state of Florida was a traditionally purple state. Could go either way, red, blue, and and there were years that happened with Obama. And then of course, we had the classic debate in Florida in year 2000, Bush v. Gore, with the voting in three counties in uh, southern Florida. But Pam Bondi um, was asked specifically about whether the Attorney General for Donald Trump was going to go after um, people in the Justice Department. And she named a name. Um, the last name was Kleinsmith, she mentioned, who was involved in giving information directly to FISA court. And the information, I don't know whether it was inaccurate, whether there was an intentional lie, whether whether information was just misinterpreted. I don't know what the past is there. Um, I I don't know this background of this Kleinsmith, but some of the MAGA people, deep in the weeds on some of the stuff that happened with Trump back in his first term, might be deeper in that. But she said, yeah, if there is someone in the Justice Department who's broken the law, you better believe we're going to go after them, applying the law with the facts that are on hand, as you would expect any Department of Justice to do. Um, so right now, Hegseth, Rubio, Bondi, light years ahead of the senators. Light years ahead of the senators. And that gets me to some observations. Um, I'll start with Richard Blumenthal. Richard Blumenthal serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee that has been engaged in the hearings for Pete Hegseth. And Richard Blumenthal lied about military service. Um, eh, you you can't make this up. The irony of a Democratic U.S. senator claiming to have served in the military when he didn't, and sitting in judgment of a potential Secretary of Defense is just rich. But let me go to something else here. Um, there was a clip of Kirsten Gillibrand, one of the senators from here in New York. One of the things Pete Hegseth has serious policy problems with is women serving in combat role in the military. Now, that doesn't mean women would not be serving in other capacities in the U.S. military. He's talking specifically combat roles. And I mean, Christian Gillibrand is just going off on him, and how can you say that? Da 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 da. And um, I mean, that's a policy debate. That's a policy discussion. Frankly, long overdue in our country. Um, but Kirsten Gillibrand just, guffawing and mocking and scorning Pete Hegseth for a position he is not alone in having. Um, Mazie Hirono, from Hawaii, a U.S. senator who, frankly, is way over her head. Um, Not someone of substance at all. Um, this gets me to one of my favorite quotations. Now, it has been attributed to Thomas Jefferson, but there are people who say that the origin of the quote is someone else. But the quote is this: the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. The price of freedom, and that goes along with the name of this podcast. I explained this in episode 1, why I was doing this. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Um, Vigilance, eternal vigilance. Someone who is constantly watching. And here's the challenge in 21st century culture. Okay? We no longer have families where there is typically just one income earner. Now, in some families that is indeed the case. But more often than not, that's not the case, especially for single parents. And and I know many married couples both working. And in a culture where people are busy, where people are um, busting their hump, make ends meet, play by the rules, all that other stuff, there are certain things that don't happen. And that's the eternal vigilance that comes with watching government. Now, I said this just weeks ago, and I'm going to say it again. Whether or not you like government and politics is immaterial, because I'm going to guarantee what government does is going to impact you. It might impact your pocketbook. There might be a regulation or a series of regulations that come on your business if you happen to own one. All kinds of things that government does that impacts what you do. And whether you like following government or not, policy, meaning the policy that comes from government, ultimately is about people. And the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. That's a pretty critical thing that is at this time in our country. Because again, we've got social media. You have instant access to things, and it becomes hard to go to the school board meeting, go to the city council meeting, go to the town board meeting, go to the village board meeting, go to the county legislature or county commission meeting. And I think because of that, we see people ascend in, oh, so and so is going to run for whatever the office. And these are people that are not of the caliber for the office for which they seek. Now, this is also going to get back to one of my other earlier podcasts, almost a year ago, where I talked about Exodus 18:21. Exodus 18:21, there are four things that Jethro, the father-in-law to Moses, tells his son-in-law. Israel is growing. There's a lot of people, and there's a lot of things that Moses is having to consume his time with in dealing with disagreements and other things. And Jethro was saying you need to be breaking down groups of people and having leaders over them. There's four things. Four things Jethro tells Moses: capable, people who are able, fear God, love the truth, and hate dishonest gain. Those four things were the standard that Jethro told his son in law Moses that you should be looking for in people who you put in charge over groups of people. And that to me is the standard the church must have, should have, as we talk about not just Romans 13, the role of government, but what we look for in people, because we have too many people. And I do not want to throw everyone under the bus, because we have some very good people who are serving in government because they do fit those four standards. But in a lot of cases, we find people, especially at the national level, who just don't muster the standard that should be met, especially for people who are dealing with issues on a national level. And this is important. And I'm going to be coming back to this after I talk about one other thing, the Hamas deal. Now, at 12:20 this afternoon, and I'm taping this about an hour later, a little after 1, Donald Trump was on Truth Social telling us that there is a deal for Hamas hostages. This is supposed to be a multi-phase thing. And the thing I am most interested in, the things that have my attention on this, are how many are dead of those hostages, how many are going back to those countries and those families in body bags. One. Two, the people who come back, how much trauma are they dealing with? There have been some horrific accounts of what these people were doing to some of the females. And these are people who will never be right ever again with the trauma that they've experienced. So, how many come back in body bags, not alive, and get to go back to loving families? How do we get those people right? And I don't care whether they're Israeli or they're Americans or whatever the nationality is. How do we get those people right with what they've experienced? And then thirdly, the thing that's on my radar screen is, people have heard me say in the past, I really think Donald Trump is going to attempt to make a statement. And here's the bigger picture and reasoning behind what I've said. America has looked so weak to the world the past 4 years under Joe Biden. that I truly believe Donald Trump is going to make a statement that says to the world in unmistakable fashion, there is a new sheriff in town and do not mess with me. That's what I think is going to happen. Now, does he direct that at Hamas? Does he direct that at Iran? I mean, Iran has attempted assassination against him. Um, there's all kinds of possibilities, but those are there. So as we, uh, I, I'm just surprised it took this long to get to this point. And the only reason we're at this point is because everybody knows what Donald Trump has said in the lead up to this. And with him getting elected, it was like, swallow real hard and say, uh-oh, a hostage deal better be forthcoming. So this is what's going on here, folks. And I just I think something's going to happen in probably the first 6 to 9 months of a Trump administration against someone somewhere. Um, I don't know what, but I sense that's going to happen. Let me get back to just government generally, and not to be disjointed in how I organize this, but this gets me to the California wildfires. Some of the stuff that we're seeing out of government. And pardon me, I'm trying to bring something up on my iPad here, because it's going to get to what I talk about. Um, let's go to the first cabinet, George Washington, late 1700s. The first cabinet is 5 guys. Oh, and we would have more than enough people in America that would say, "Oh, yeah, they were so offended that they were all white." But needless to say, we had George Washington, his vice president, John Adams. We had Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury. We had Henry Knox, Secretary of War. The Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. And he also had an Attorney General, and I forget his name. So there were basically 6 people in the cabinet for the first president. In my remarks about the California wildfires, focuses on what happens when government goes beyond their constitutional limits and they get sidetracked with a lot of other things. So the average person, if you distill government down to the local county levels, whether it's local government or the county that people live, they they want the garbage taken care of. They want roads repaired. If you live in snow country, we had 11 inches in 17 hours here at my house. You want your roads plowed. You want utilities, unless there's a business that you rely on for the utility of electricity, um, water, sewer, um, and if you live out in rural America, sewer isn't even a thing there because it costs a fortune to get sewer to those folks. But basic government services, that's what people expect. And then when you get to the state and national levels, it's we want to live in a state, in a country that has relative peace, security for folks. I'm going to mention the Rush Limbaugh, the late Rush Limbaugh. His definition of war was to kill people and break things. It's one of the functions of why Pete Hegseth was one of the first people up for hearing, because Department of Defense is a big deal. Um, and let's get this to California. So, one of the alternative news programs called News Nation um, had a segment in the last day or two that revealed it took 45 minutes from someone who made a call to a fire department to actually respond to Pacific Palisades, where they had complete destruction. Folks, we're now talking 12,000 homes. 12,000 homes. And we've had stories of fire hydrants that didn't have water in them. We've had accounts of water reservoirs that should have had water or were scheduled for some kind of repair, and that didn't happen. And that's why water was not there. All kinds of things. And I've had some time to chew on this since these fires started. Um, and when government gets too big, when government gets into territory that it has no constitutional obligation, we get government that is incompetent, doesn't respond, doesn't take care of its responsibilities. Some people dropped the ball in LA County. And I don't know who those people are, but I'm left wondering now if we are going to be witnessing the undoing of democratic rule in the state of California over this. Um, we have to wait to see if that happens. But when you get government that gets off into all kinds of territory where there is no constitutional responsibility, you get what has unfolded in California. And that brings me to a point here. So I've mentioned the first cabinet, 6 people: AG, Secretary of State, Treasurer, or Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of War, plus the Vice President and the President. Let me read you the current Biden cabinet. This is straight from the White House website. Okay? You're going to love this. If you're a small government conservative, you're going to love this. Okay. So, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, Dr. Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense. So far, we're into the territory that was the first cabinet. And then we have Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. Okay, that's the completion of the first cabinet. Then we get Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, Tom Vilsack, Secretary of Agriculture, Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, Julie Su, Acting Secretary of Labor, Xavier Becerra, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Adrian Todman, Deputy Secretary performing the delegable duties of the Secretary. It doesn't even give us the name of the agency. Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation, Jennifer Granholm, Secretary of Energy, Dr. Miguel Cardona, Secretary of Education, Dennis McDonough, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, Jeff Zients, Chief of Staff. Michael Reagan, Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Avril Haines, Director of National Intelligence. Catherine Tai, U.S. Trade Representative. Linda Thomas Greenfield, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Jared Bernstein, the Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. Isabel Guzman, Administrator of the Small Business Administration. Shalonda Young, Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Dr. Arati Pabhakar, Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and William Burns, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. That's the Biden cabinet. I'm just going to repeat. When government gets into territory that is not in the constitutional responsibilities, you get the kind of incompetence that we have been witnessing in California in handling the wildfires. And with that, I thank you once again for watching, sharing, reading my column on Substack, and sharing that. Um, Folks, dropping a new column on Sunday that is kind of focused on the end of the Biden term on a faith and cultural aspect. So you can be looking for that. Um, and I will be adding, outside of the Mark Wayne Mullen video, I will be adding the uh, something lighter that I found just skimming social media that hopefully will put a smile on your face. And until next time, God bless and goodbye.